start with the Lions versus the Saints. That's your Saturday 8 p.m. matchup. Tad, give me the one key matchup for the Lions offense.
Now, we saw going into the playoffs that the Lions really had a great warm-up game for this game last week against Matt Flynn and that Green Bay Packers team, because you know this game is going to be a lot of points, and they're going to be going back and forth. That makes the key for the offense: don't turn the ball over. Why did you lose against Green Bay last week? You lost the turnover battle. You turned it over 4 times, 2 fumbles, 2 interceptions. Green Bay only turned the ball over twice. That's why you lost that game in a very, very close one. I think the margin for error is very slim. You got to score just about every time, and you can't turn the ball over. That would be the Lions' key on offense.
Yeah. And how about the Saints defense, A-Ross?
Saints defense, my matchup, obviously Detroit has a lot of weapons on this team, and it all starts with getting pressure on Matthew Stafford, but I think the biggest matchup is Calvin Johnson against Tracy Porter and Roman Harper, the Saints. I feel like they're going to double team Calvin Johnson the entire game, and they're going to make the rest of that receiving core for Detroit beat them, because if you look at what's happened this season, Detroit has gone where Calvin Johnson's taken them. He's the one that's been scoring all the big touchdowns to win them all these big games. And after Calvin Johnson, your number 2 and 3 receivers are Nate Burleson and rookie Titus Young. You got a couple good tight ends in Scheffler and Pettigrew, but those guys, there's a big drop-off once you get past Calvin Johnson. And I feel like Greg Williams, besides blitzing Matthew Stafford as much as he possibly can, I feel like he's going to make those other receivers beat Detroit and possibly try to make their running game beat them, which Detroit shows they can't run the football.
Okay, so now let's go to the other side of the ball before we get into more of this. So let's go with the Lions defense.
And this is the same thing. It's kind of a broken record on this one, but like I said, with the offense, you have to turn the ball over less than the Saints. Defense, you got to force more turnovers than the Saints are going to have. One thing the Lions did well this whole season was force turnovers. 32 turnovers forced by the Detroit Lions. The Saints defense, which getting to the Super Bowl the year that they did and winning the Super Bowl, forced a ton of turnovers by blitzing. They only forced 14 turnovers all season. So that was a big deal here. If the Lions could kind of keep that trend, not turn the ball over and force turnovers, that's what their defense has to do, because you're not going to stop this team. You got to jump a couple routes, and it's very hard to also pressure the New Orleans Saints because Drew Brees gets rid of the ball so quickly and is so accurate. So you got to get a fumble or you got to get a interception.
Do you think the key is going to happen at scrimmage, or is the key in the secondary? If you were to weigh it in some way.
In the secondary, because I think the Saints protect so well. They have 2 Pro Bowl, All-Pro guards. And one of the things about having those guards instead of the tackles as the key of your offensive line, what's the shortest distance to get to the quarterback? Up the middle. You protect that. Drew Brees has such a quick release getting rid of the ball. Outside pass rushers, fact of nature. It takes a longer time to get to a quarterback around than it does up front. You protect that up front, Drew Brees gets rid of the ball. I don't think the Lions are going to get much pressure at all. They got to find a way to get interceptions or fumbles after a catch or after a run.
Yeah, the Saints' offensive line is allowing 1 sack per 27 dropbacks. That's first in the league. So maybe Sue won't be so much of a factor. We'll see how that secondary does. That's not a great secondary.
It has a lot to do with both the offensive line and the quick release of the quarterback.
Absolutely. A-Roz, how about the other side of it?
If you look at the Lions defense and the biggest matchup problem, we can both say the Saints have weapons all over the place. So, it's hard to pick out one guy, but the one I picked was one guy that plays just about every snap a game. And no, I'm not talking about Drew Brees. I'm talking about the biggest matchup nightmare for any opposing defense, and that's tight end Jimmy Graham. Think about this. The guy played 1 year of organized football before getting drafted by the Saints. He played 1 year in college at the University of Miami. And look what he's done this year. 99 receptions for 1,300 yards and 11 touchdowns. The receiving yards are NFL record for tight ends. He has been phenomenal. And the way I look at this matchup is that he's too big to be covered by a corner, and he's too fast to be covered by a linebacker. So the only possible player that could actually match up with him are the Lions safeties. Now, safeties aren't typically known to be going man-to-man coverage. They're more to play center field. But those are the two players that would have to at least try to guard Jimmy Graham. Otherwise, he is going to torch this Lions secondary and torch this defense. I think he presents the biggest nightmare for the Lions defense, more so than Darren Sproles, because Sproles, it doesn't play as many snaps as, let's say, a Pierre Thomas or a Chris Ivory. He's going to be probably the first target for Drew Brees, if not Marcus Colston. So how the Lions plan to match up with Jimmy Graham will be probably the biggest difference of how they can slow this Saints offense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And the other thing I think with the Saints is that you have those matchup problems with the running game. I mean, it's a year where you're seeing a lot of teams that aren't very well balanced in any way. I mean, not just the offense versus defense. That's been a problem. That's a problem for a lot of teams. The Packers aren't playing good D this year. The Saints have never, they play medium defense. The Patriots are terrible. But then a lot of these teams don't have a running game. The Packers don't have a running game. The Patriots don't have a running game as far as these high-powered offenses. Mm-hmm. But the Saints have a great running game. Sproles is electric. I don't know how he was ever. How did he get here? How did they let him get here? It's amazing. These two teams played in Week 13. Mm-hmm. It was 31-17 in a game where, when you look at it pound for pound, it was pretty evenly matched. Stafford threw for 408 yards. Brees threw for 342. They rushed about the same. They received about the same. They had similar total yards. The key was 11 penalties by Detroit for over 100 yards and only 3 penalties for New Orleans. I think that's going to be a key here. Basically, don't make mistakes against one of the NFL's best teams.
And show discipline, which the Lions didn't do down the stretch. They were undisciplined with the penalties, and then turnovers and penalties. That's what it's going to be. Special teams, they're fairly even in that. Stephon Logan's a pretty good kick returner. Now, the Saints kind of have a bad draw here in that the Lions can match them offensively. But both teams, like I said, the Lions had that great warm-up game against the Packers. Mm-hmm. Matt Stafford threw for 520 yards that game, 2 interceptions. That was the problem. Get rid of those interceptions, that might be enough. The 520 might be enough. Meanwhile, the Saints, they played the Carolina Panthers, who matched them punch for punch in the first half of that game. The Saints defense shut out the Panthers in the second half. The Panthers, you might say, is one of the best offenses in the NFL as well, with a player like Cam Newton. So that's one thing to look at. If the Saints get ahead, they can't feel comfortable. You look at the Lions. First team in NFL history to have 4 comebacks of 13 points or more. They come back from 20, 24, 17, and 13-point deficits this year. So you got to watch out. They do have the ability to come back. Though, if you look at the Lions versus NFL playoff teams this year, 0-5. That's another thing to consider in this game.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely something to consider in this game.